Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ben, and this is the first episode in my new series, Let's Talk Politics. In this episode, we'll be discussing the 2015 general election in the United Kingdom. One of the first things any new observer will notice about the 2015 general election is the sheer number of political parties that seem to be involved in things. Whereas traditionally you only have really Labour on the left and the Conservatives on the right, in this election you have a lot more than that. Both on the left of politics and the right. You have UKIP, the Greens, Liberal Democrats, the DUP, Plaid Cymru, and of course the Scottish National Party, who have become quite a political force since the, albeit lost, Scottish independence referendum last year. So why are there so many parties just now? Like, this is purely unique in British politics. Not even unlike in 2010. I mean, yeah, sure, coalitions are rare, but they've happened before. But this is the first time we've had so many. One of the big reasons is, in 2010, the Liberal Democrats kind of were the protest party of choice. There were the two main parties plus the protest party. If you didn't like one of the two main ones, you voted for the Lib Dems. And that kind of changed when Nick Clegg took the Liberal Democrats into power alongside the Conservatives. Because now the Liberal Democrats were the party of power. They were the party of government, not protest. So these other parties, particularly the Green Party, benefited from Liberal Democrats' collapse in the polls following their coalition with the Conservatives, kind of rose up to become the new protest party of choice. Along with, in Wales, kind of Plaid Cymru has come to the fore. And of course, with the focus on immigration that is increasingly popular in UK politics, you have the likes of UKIP rising. But the SNP, and to an extent Plaid Cymru, who are riding on the coattails of the SNP a bit, the situation's kind of different, and it all stems back to the nationalist tide that's been a result of the 2014 Scottish independence referendum. That's going to be a topic of another video. We're going to discuss the rise of the SNP and the consequences of that for Labour, particularly, and the rest of the United Kingdom, in a later video. One of the big consequences, however, of having so many parties is that the polls are a lot more fragmented than usual. You can see here the two main parties, the Labour Party and the Conservatives, are on 35 points and 34 points, respectively. Now that's fairly low for both parties. The Conservatives were on about 37% in 2010, which in itself was fairly low compared to most general elections across British history, at least British post-war electoral history. I've not done too much reading about previous elections before the Second World War. But the biggest thing that you'll notice about this is the poll ratings of the smaller parties. You have 12% for UKIP, particularly, and 4% for the Greens. 9% for the Liberal Democrats is kind of actually quite low for them as well. Again, previous election they were on 23%. The fact that you have essentially three main challenger parties down there is quite significant, and a big difference as a result of the multi-party politics that seems to be rising in Britain. And in Scotland the situation is even more radically different from the past. You have the SNP there, and as you can see, in 2014 they surged upwards, rapidly overtaking the Labour Party, reaching 49% in the polls. That's unheard of. It really is unheard of to have a political party garnering that much support. And of course, Labour in their traditional heartlands of Scotland collapsing to only 25% in the polls. So where does that leave the state in the next parliament? How many MPs from which each party are going to be elected? Well, if Britain used proportional representation, a PR-based electoral system, you'd have something that would probably look a little bit like this. Labour on 228 seats, the Conservatives on 221, UKIP on 78, the Liberal Democrats on 59, SNP on 29, and the Greens on 26. Now this is way lower than Labour and the Conservatives usually... Sorry about that, my phone went off. Scottish Labour Party emailing me. But yeah, this is a lot fewer seats than they usually get. The two main parties usually get a lot more than the likes of UKIP, Liberal Democrats, and the Greens would normally get. The SNP are a bit different in this because of normally they'd actually get more than that under the new system of Scottish politics. But as I've been hinting at, it doesn't really work like that. The big curveball of British politics is the first past the post electoral system that we use, which supports Labour and the Conservatives and really punishes the smaller parties other than the SNP, who are kind of different because of their unheard of polling ratings. But that means you have to poll a bit differently. You can't predict seats just a bit differently. You can't just do a bit of maths to work out 35% off 650. You need to be a bit smarter than that, and that's why we have websites like Electoral Calculus, who worked out this for me. Under the polling I showed you earlier, the UK-wide polling, we're looking like we would get something a little bit like this. A Labour majority of 2 on 326 seats. I'm not sure how that's a majority of 2, probably something to do with Northern Irish Party, specifically Sinn Féin, not actually taking their seats in Westminster. But generally you'd consider 326 to be a majority of 1 rather than 2. Hey ho. And the Conservatives a bit behind on 379 seats. Liberal Democrats of course collapsing, losing 40 seats as you see here to only 17. Greens on 1. And the SNP on 6. But it's not really going to be like that either, is it? Because of these people, the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon, who as I said have, and as I showed you earlier in the Scotland polls, have been doing really rather well recently. And that previous projection of seats I showed you doesn't take that into account. So here's one that does. In this setup, Labour is short 33 seats of a majority in the House of Commons, and the SNP are on 54 seats. That's a lot. And of course the SNP, and of course the Liberal Democrats even, are losing even more seats than in the previous scenario, due to their losses to the SNP as well. So all these things bring us to the big question of the general election. Who's going to be the next Prime Minister? Well, increasingly a lot of people are thinking that's going to be Ed Miliband, leader of the Labour Party. His party's doing well in the polls. He himself is doing a lot better in the polls since the start of the short electoral campaign. And is hoping to do even better with his interview with Russell Brand, reaching out to young and non-voters. But if you listen to the Scottish Labour Party, the ones who are really butting heads with the SNP, the SNP surge, according to them, means that Ed might not be Prime Minister. We might end up with this guy for another 5 years. And I suppose, yeah, we could end up with a Conservative Prime Minister for another 5 years, David Cameron. But really that doesn't look likely. As you see here, based on the predictions we did earlier, a Labour-SNP coalition, or a loose agreement, seeing as they don't really want to go into coalition with each other, would give you something like this. 347 seats for that coalition government. A similar thing with the SNP going in with the Conservatives. They'd only have 322 seats, and that's not really enough to win a vote of confidence. If either party went with the Liberal Democrats instead of the SNP, well then neither of them would have enough to form a majority government, because the Lib Dems are just too small now. And then you have pretty much a situation where, to form a majority government, the Conservatives are going to have to pretty much unite every single other party, other than Labour in the House of Commons, against Labour. And really that's not going to be that likely either, especially seeing as the SNP have unequivocally ruled out any sort of deal with the Conservatives. Rightly so, seeing as everyone in Scotland hates the Conservatives. So it looks like, unfortunately for you Scottish Labour fans out there, myself included, it's looking like the SNP surge isn't going to actually end up with David Cameron as Prime Minister, and either way we're going to end up with Ed. And that means that Labour aren't quite telling the truth in Scotland, and that's kind of unfortunate, and it could really come back to bite them after this election if things don't go well, especially with the Holyrood Scottish Parliament elections next year. But I suppose Britain can be thankful that even with the SNP surge, it's not looking likely we're going to get a Conservative Prime Minister again. So that's pretty much it from me, folks. This has just been a brief rundown of the 2015 general election, just looking at the polling a bit and the sort of results we might see, not going into too much detail on individual facets of it. I'm going to be doing that in separate videos later on, especially with discussing the SNP and their surge and what that means for this general election, and they're quite big topics, so we're going to deal with them in separate videos. So if you have enjoyed Let's Talk Politics, please do like this video, subscribe, and talk to me in the comments as well. I will be reading every single comment and answering a fair bit of them as well. Something you don't get in this video, put in the comments and I'll answer it. More than happy to help. And if you want more political discussion, information, and news, remember to hit that subscribe button and come back for more Let's Talk Politics. Thank you, and goodbye.